The night was so dark even the rats couldn't see. May 15, 1918. The Argonne Forest. Private Henry Johnson gripped his rifle with hands that had once picked tobacco in Albany, New York. He was 21 years old. In 4 hours, he would become a legend. They called them the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Infantry Regiment. Black soldiers fighting for a country that wouldn't let them eat at the same lunch counters as white folks back home. But here, in the mud and blood of France, they were America's front line. Johnson stood watch with Private Needham Roberts. 2 men, 1 outpost. The Germans called this sector the meat grinder. The French called it hell. Johnson called it Tuesday night. The silence was wrong. Too wrong. In war, silence doesn't mean peace, it means death is holding its breath. Then he heard it. The faint clink of metal on metal, wire cutters on barbed wire. His heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Roberts, he whispered, but Roberts had already heard it too. What happened next would be told in whispers for 100 years. What happened next would earn Henry Johnson the nickname Black Death. What happened next would prove that courage doesn't check your skin color at the door. The Germans came like shadows. Not 5, not 10, not 20. Reports would later confirm at least 24 enemy soldiers. Some witnesses claimed 40 against 2 men. 2 black men that America barely considered citizens. Johnson fired his rifle until it was empty. Roberts threw grenades until shrapnel tore through his body. The mathematics of war said they should die. The mathematics of war had never met Henry Johnson. When his rifle jammed, he used it as a club. When it broke, he pulled out his bolo knife. When they tried to drag Roberts away as a prisoner, something ancient awakened in Henry Johnson. Something that predated nations and flags. Something that said, "Not my brother. Not tonight." He became the storm. Before that night, Henry Johnson was invisible, just another black man in Albany, working as a railroad porter, carrying bags for people who wouldn't look him in the eye, smiling at jokes that cut like knives. Living in a country that took his taxes but not his testimony in a court of law. When America entered World War I, black men volunteered in droves. They believed what they'd been told. Fight for democracy abroad. Earn democracy at home. Show your patriotism. Prove your worth. Bleed for the flag, and maybe the flag will finally cover you too. The U.S. Army didn't want them, not in combat roles. They wanted black soldiers to dig latrines, unload ships, cook meals, support roles, safe roles, invisible roles. The kind of roles America had always reserved for its black citizens. But the French were desperate. They'd lost a generation of young men in the trenches. They needed bodies, they needed fighters. They didn't care about the color of the hand holding the rifle, only that it could pull the trigger. So the 369th Infantry Regiment was loaned to the French Army. Like equipment, like ammunition, like things, not men. It was meant to be an insult. It became their salvation. The French gave them real weapons. The French gave them a real sector to defend. The French gave them what America wouldn't. Respect. The Harlem Hellfighters spent more time in frontline trenches than any other American unit. 191 days, 6 months of hell. They never gave up ground. Not once. No member of the 369th was ever captured. Their regimental band, led by James Reese Europe, introduced jazz to European audiences. Between battles, they played music that made French soldiers weep for a home they'd never seen. But on that night in May, there was no music. Only the sound of Henry Johnson's breath in the darkness. Only the whisper of death approaching through no man's land. Only the weight of knowing that if he failed, the entire sector could collapse. He thought of his wife, Edna. He thought of his children. He thought of Albany and its segregated streetcars. He thought of all the times he'd been called boy by men half his age. And he gripped his rifle tighter, because tonight he wasn't fighting for America. He was fighting for the man beside him. He was fighting because that's what soldiers do. He was fighting because nobody, not the Germans, not Jim Crow, not death itself, was going to make Henry Johnson bow. The first German appeared like a ghost. Johnson fired. The man crumpled. Then came the second, the third. His rifle spat death into the darkness, each shot a promise. You will not pass. You will not take us. You will not win. Roberts fought beside him, hurling grenades with the fury of the righteous. The night exploded in flashes of light and thunder. For a moment, it seemed like they might hold. For a moment, It seemed like 2 men could stop an army. Then Roberts went down. 3 grenades worth of shrapnel painted the trench red. He was alive but couldn't stand, couldn't fight, could only watch as the shadows kept coming. Johnson was alone now. 1 man between the Germans and the Allied line. 1 man between order and chaos. His rifle clicked empty. No time to reload. They were too close. Too many. A German soldier swung his rifle butt at Johnson's head. Johnson ducked, came up swinging his own rifle like a baseball bat. He'd played baseball in Albany, in the Negro Leagues, where the only thing that mattered was how hard you could hit. He hit hard enough to hear bones crack. But there were too many. They swarmed him, hands grabbed at his uniform, his weapon, his throat. In the melee, his rifle was torn away. They thought they had him. They thought it was over. They didn't know Henry Johnson carried a bolo knife. 9 inches of steel that he'd sharpened until it could split a hair, a knife that would become more famous than most generals' swords. He pulled it from his belt in one smooth motion. The blade caught moonlight like a promise. And Henry Johnson began to teach the German army why you never corner a Harlem Hellfighter. The first cut opened a throat. The second found a belly. He moved like a dancer, like a storm, like death itself had taken human form. Blood made the trench floors slick, bodies piled like sandbags. Still they came. 1 German grabbed Roberts, started dragging him toward enemy lines. A prisoner. A prize. Proof of their victory. Johnson saw it happen through a haze of blood and fury, saw his brother being stolen. Saw red. What happened next, even the Germans who survived couldn't fully explain. Johnson launched himself at the group carrying Roberts. He was wounded, bleeding from 21 different places. He should have been dead. Instead, he was magnificent. In war, there are moments when time stops, when a single second stretches like an eternity, when one choice, one action, one man can change everything. This was Henry Johnson's moment. He crashed into the Germans carrying Roberts like a force of nature. His knife found flesh, found purpose, found justice. He stabbed and slashed and screamed, not words. Something primal, something that needed no translation. A German bayonet found his leg. He kept fighting. A rifle butt cracked against his skull. He kept fighting. They shot him. Point blank. The bullet tore through his side. Henry Johnson kept fighting, because in that moment he wasn't just Henry Johnson. He was every black soldier who'd been told he couldn't fight. He was every porter who'd been called boy. He was every man who'd been told to know his place, and his place was right here. Right now, between the enemy and his brother, the Germans broke. These hardened veterans of the Western Front, men who'd survived Verdun and the Somme, they ran from 1 wounded American private. They left their dead. They left their wounded. They left their dignity in that trench. Johnson collapsed next to Roberts. Both men bleeding, both men dying, both men victorious. In the growing light of dawn, they could see what they'd done. Bodies everywhere. German equipment scattered like toys. Blood painting the earth in abstract patterns. Roberts would later say that Johnson fought like a man possessed. But Johnson wasn't possessed. He was free. For the first time in his life, truly free. Free to fight without restraint. Free to be exactly what he was. A warrior. The French found them at sunrise. A rescue patrol expecting to find an overrun position. Instead, they found 2 men who'd held off an entire German raiding party. 2 men who'd done the impossible. The French medic counted Johnson's wounds. 21. Any 3 of them should have killed him. The bolo knife was still in his hand, the blade black with dried blood. He was unconscious but breathing, still fighting, even in his dreams. They carried both men to the field hospital. French soldiers lined the route, saluting. Word had already spread. 2 Americans, 2 black Americans, had saved the entire sector, had fought like lions, had proved what every soldier knows but few admit: courage has no color. News of the battle reached French headquarters within hours, then Paris, then the world. Newspapers that had never printed a black man's name on the front page suddenly couldn't get enough of Henry Johnson. The Battle of Henry Johnson, they called it, as if he'd been an army unto himself. Which, in a way, he had been. The French count was staggering. 4 Germans dead by Johnson's hand, at least 10 more wounded, and an entire raid repulsed. Johnson woke in the hospital 3 days later. His first word was Roberts, his second was water, his third through 20th were curses in 3 languages as the pain hit him like a freight train. The French officers who came to interview him could barely believe the evidence. The trench looked like a slaughterhouse. German weapons and equipment littered the ground. Blood trails led back toward enemy lines where the wounded had crawled away. "How many men were with you?" they asked through a translator. "Just Roberts," Johnson replied. No. How many reinforcements came?" "No reinforcements, just me and Roberts." The officers exchanged glances. They'd seen the bodies. They'd counted the blood trails. 2 men couldn't have done this. It was impossible. But the evidence didn't lie, and neither did Henry Johnson. Within a week, France knew his name. General John Pershing, commander of American forces, was forced to acknowledge what his segregated army had tried to ignore. A black private had just become America's first hero of the Great War. But back home the reaction was mixed. Southern newspapers buried the story. Some questioned whether it had really happened. Others suggested the French were exaggerating to make America look bad. Because how could a Negro porter from Albany do what trained white soldiers couldn't? The answer was simple, though few wanted to hear it. Henry Johnson fought like a man with nothing to lose because America had given him nothing to lose. He fought like a man with everything to prove because America had made him prove his humanity every single day. But in that trench, covered in mud and blood and glory, Henry Johnson proved something else. He proved that heroism isn't granted by the powerful. It's taken by the brave. It's carved out with a 9-inch knife and written in the blood of tyrants. France gave Henry Johnson the Croix de Guerre with star and bronze palm. He was the first American private to receive France's highest military honor. They pinned it on his chest while he was still in his hospital bed, too weak to stand. The ceremony was supposed to be small, just a few officers, a photographer, a moment of recognition. But word spread through the hospital. French soldiers came. Nurses came. Doctors abandoned their rounds. Soon the room was packed with people who wanted to see the American who'd fought like a demon. The French general made a speech. Johnson didn't understand the words, but he understood the tears in the old soldier's eyes. He understood the salutes from men who'd seen too much war to be easily impressed. He understood that here, in this moment, he was not just a man. He was a symbol. But symbols are heavy things to carry, especially for a railroad porter from Albany with 21 healing wounds and a country that still wouldn't serve him coffee in most diners. Johnson recovered slowly, too slowly. The wounds were too deep, too many. His left foot would never work right again. His left arm hung useless for weeks. The doctors whispered about nerve damage, about bullets still lodged too deep to remove, about a body that had given more than bodies were meant to give. Roberts recovered faster despite his wounds. He would return to limited duty, but Johnson was done as a combat soldier. The man who'd proven black soldiers could fight better than anyone would never fight again. The regiment tried to keep him busy. They made him a sergeant, had him train new recruits. But teaching men to fight when you could barely walk was its own kind of torture. He watched them drill, these fresh-faced boys from Harlem and Brooklyn and the Bronx, and wondered how many would die proving what he'd already proven. At night, the pain kept him awake. Not just the physical pain, though that was constant, the other pain. The knowledge that he'd given everything for a country that would give him nothing in return. The certainty that his medals would not protect him from Jim Crow, that his blood in French soil would not buy him a seat at a white lunch counter. He wrote letters home to Edna, told her about the medal, told her about the French nurses who called him Le Noir Mort, the Black Death. Didn't tell her about the nightmares, didn't tell her about the German boys he'd killed who looked younger than his own son, didn't tell her that he jumped at every unexpected sound, that he kept his bolo knife under his pillow, that sometimes he forgot where he was and reached for a rifle that wasn't there. The war ended on November 11, 1918. The Harlem Hellfighters had spent more days in frontline trenches than any other American unit. They'd never lost a man through capture. They'd never given up ground. They came home heroes. New York City threw them a parade. February 17, 1919. They marched up Fifth Avenue, these black soldiers who'd been told they couldn't fight. Jim Europe's band played jazz that made the crowd dance in the winter streets. At the front, wearing his Croix de Guerre, limped Sergeant Henry Johnson. The crowd was massive, black and white faces together, cheering together, weeping together. For one afternoon, New York forgot it was segregated. For one afternoon, America remembered that blood is all the same color. Johnson tried to smile, tried to wave, tried to be the hero they needed. But his left arm wouldn't work right. His left foot dragged. The 21 wounds that had made him famous had also broken him in ways that would never heal. After the parade, reality returned like a slap. The white soldiers got jobs, got benefits, got respect. The Harlem Hellfighters got remembered when convenient and forgotten when not. Johnson went back to work as a porter, back to carrying bags for people who called him boy despite the medal on his chest. He tried to tell his story, gave speeches about the war, about that night in May, about what black soldiers had done for democracy. But America wasn't ready to hear it. Some said he was exaggerating, others said he was getting uppity. Many just looked away, uncomfortable with a hero who reminded them of their hypocrisy. The pain got worse. The old wounds never properly healed. He self-medicated with alcohol, trying to quiet the screaming in his nerves and his memories. Edna tried to help, but how do you help a man who's been to hell and back only to find hell waiting at home too? He lost his job. The railroad didn't want a porter who sometimes forgot where he was, who sometimes saw Germans in the shadows, who carried a knife and knew too well how to use it. They thanked him for his service and showed him the door. By 1920, Henry Johnson was broke. The hero of the Argonne Forest was pawning his belongings to buy food. The man who'd saved an entire sector couldn't save himself from poverty. France would have pensioned him, France would have cared for him, but he wasn't French, he was American, and America had gotten what it needed from Henry Johnson. The 1920s roared for everyone but Henry Johnson. While America danced to jazz that his regiment had helped popularize, he sank deeper into poverty and pain. While Harlem Renaissance artists created beauty from struggle, he struggled just to survive. He took odd jobs when his body allowed, swept floors, washed dishes, anything to keep food on the table. But the wounds always won. The shattered left foot would give out. The damaged nerves would scream. The memories would overwhelm, and he'd lose another job. Edna left. Not from lack of love, but from exhaustion. She'd married a strong young man who'd carried luggage like it weighed nothing. She was living with a ghost who carried wounds like they weighed everything. She took the children. Johnson didn't fight it. He'd done enough fighting for one lifetime. He moved into smaller rooms, then smaller still, from apartment to rooming house to flop house. Each step down a reminder that America honored its heroes with parades, not pensions. With speeches, not support. With medals, not medicine. Other veterans formed organizations, support groups, lobbies for benefits. But they were white veterans. Black veterans were expected to be grateful they'd been allowed to die for their country at all. The American Legion posts were segregated. The Veterans Administration had different rules for different colors. Henry Johnson had integrated a French trench with his blood, but he couldn't integrate an American hospital. He wrote letters to the War Department, asking for disability compensation, asking for recognition of his wounds, asking for anything. The letters came back with form rejections. Records were incomplete. Documentation was missing. Witnesses were unavailable. Strange how the Army could document every bullet he'd fired, but not every bullet he'd taken. Sometimes, late at night in whatever room he was renting, he'd take out the croix de guerre, hold it up to the light. Remember the French general's tears. Remember the salutes. Remember the moment when he'd been more than just another invisible black man in America. But medals don't pay rent, honor doesn't buy medicine, and glory doesn't heal 21 wounds that America pretended didn't exist. By 1927, Henry Johnson was dying, not from German bullets or bayonets, from neglect, from poverty, from a country that used him up and threw him away. The railroad porter who'd carried an entire sector on his back couldn't carry himself anymore. He died on July 5, 1929. Alone, forgotten, just another black veteran in a pauper's grave. The newspapers that had celebrated him in 1919 didn't even print an obituary. The Army that had finally made him a sergeant didn't send a representative to his funeral. America had moved on from its black heroes. For decades, Henry Johnson lay in Albany's Arlington Cemetery, his grave marked only with a small stone. No mention of his service, no mention of his sacrifice. No mention that here lay the first American private to win the Croix de Guerre, just another black man America had forgotten. But stories like his don't die, they hibernate. They wait. They whisper in the darkness until someone finally listens. His son Herman grew up and joined the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. Another black man proving what should never have needed proving. He carried his father's story with him into the sky. Historians began to dig. Veterans began to ask questions. Why wasn't Henry Johnson in the history books? Why hadn't he received American medals for his heroism? Why did France honor him while America ignored him? The answers were as ugly as they were obvious. The same racism that had forced the 369th to fight under French command had erased their victories from American memory. The same prejudice that segregated them in life had segregated them from history. In 1996, President Clinton awarded Henry Johnson the Purple Heart, 67 years after his death. His son Herman, now an old man himself, accepted it with tears streaming down his face. It was something. It wasn't enough. In 2002, they gave him the Distinguished Service Cross. Another posthumous medal for a posthumous hero. Another attempt to right wrongs that could never be fully righted, because you can't give a dead man his life back. You can't undo decades of suffering with ceremonies, but they kept digging. Historians, veterans, Americans, who believed that heroism should be honored regardless of color. They found witnesses. They found reports. They found proof of what everyone who'd been in that trench already knew. Henry Johnson deserved the Medal of Honor. In 2015, President Obama finally gave it to him, the highest military honor America can bestow. 86 years after Henry Johnson bled for democracy. 86 years after he proved that courage has no color. 86 years too late. Command Sergeant Major Lewis Wilson accepted the medal on behalf of the Johnson family. He stood in the White House, this black soldier receiving what another black soldier had earned with blood and sacrifice, and a 9-inch knife in the darkness of no man's land. Private Johnson, Obama said, displayed the most extraordinary heroism and complete disregard for his own safety. Words that should have been said in 1919. Recognition that should have come when it could have bought medicine, paid rent, saved a life. Today, Henry Johnson is remembered. There's a statue in Albany, a street named after him in his old neighborhood. Military bases teach his story to new recruits. The Harlem Hellfighters are in the history books where they belong. But his story isn't really about medals or recognition. It's about what we demand from heroes and what we owe them in return. It's about the gap between what we say we value and what we actually do. It's about the price of prejudice, paid in blood and poverty, and forgotten graves. Every war produces Henry Johnsons. Men and women who give everything for countries that give them nothing back, who fight for freedoms they don't fully possess, who bleed for principles their nations don't practice. We use them up in our darkest hours and discard them in our brightest. Henry Johnson fought 40 Germans with a knife and won. But he couldn't fight the system that saw him as less than human. He could save a sector but not himself. He could earn France's highest honor but not America's basic respect. His 21 wounds healed into scars that told a story America didn't want to hear, that black men could be heroes. That courage comes in all colors, that the measure of a man isn't the melanin in his skin but the metal in his soul. In that trench, in that darkness, in that moment of truth, Henry Johnson became what America always claimed to be, exceptional. He proved that greatness isn't granted by birth or privilege or skin color. It's seized with bloody hands and hearts that refuse to bow. They called him the Black Death, but Henry Johnson was life, life refusing to surrender, life demanding to matter, life proving that no man is invisible when he stands between his brothers and harm. Remember his name. Not because he was perfect, he wasn't. Not because his story is comfortable. It isn't. Remember him because in forgetting Henry Johnson, we forget ourselves. We forget what we owe those who offer everything. We forget that heroism unrewarded is heroism betrayed. Remember him because somewhere tonight another Henry Johnson stands watch. Another invisible person doing visible things. Another hero we'll celebrate too late or not at all. Remember him so maybe, just maybe, we'll do better next time. Henry Lincoln Johnson, railroad porter, husband, father, soldier, hero, American, human, a man who faced 40 Germans with a 9-inch knife and won. A man who faced American racism with the same courage and lost. A man whose blood in French soil bought him medals but whose blood in American veins bought him nothing. His grave is marked properly now. His name is in the books. His Medal of Honor gleams in a museum case. Too late for him, perhaps not too late for us. Perhaps not too late to learn that the greatest tragedy isn't dying for your country. It's living in a country that lets you die forgotten. Like the video, subscribe and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe history is made not only by armies, but by individual courage.